give you my welcome. I am Martha Minow. I'm the dean here at Harvard Law School, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all for this important program. I have actually spent my own professional life working on advocacy for children with a focus on education. One of the topics that has always seemed to me the most compelling and tragically the most incomplete is the dream of equal opportunity in the educational realm for every child. And in this rich country that we haven't achieved it, we really should feel ashamed of ourselves. When you then look at particular populations, such as those children who are in foster care, where there is at risk of a further mismatch or lack of connection, lack of opportunity, children who may need to have continuity of care and precisely that's not what they're getting. I think that, again, as a society, we have a challenge before us. So I admire so much the people who've come together to work on this issue. I know that you will bring great insight to this discussion and also great urgency to it. I'm especially pleased that Senators Grassley and Landrieu will join us through the wonders of video conferencing technology and to have the chance to talk to some of the leading national decision makers, I think makes this a very special occasion. I know that many people in this room have spent a long time trying to make sure that every child has a safe chance to actually explore their own interests and to be integrated into the general community. I think one of the biggest challenges is how can we make sure that the programs, the designs, the laws that are created with all of the good intention don't push in the wrong direction. Don't push against the integration of every child into the general community with everyone else. And that, I am sure, is a challenge that will guide your analysis and discussions here today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Daniel Heipel, who is the Director of Fostering Media Connections, one of the organizers of this event, along with the Child Advocacy Program here at Harvard Law School. This kind of partnership is the kind of initiative that we here at Harvard try to engage, because none of the issues of the sort that you're talking about here today can ever be solved with just one group. It's only through partnerships and people working together that we're going to make a difference, and I commend you for your work and your effort and wish you an engaging time. Daniel.
Hi there, I'm Daniel Heipel. I'm the Director of Fostering Media Connections. Thanks to everybody for coming out tonight in this second iteration of our On the Road to Educational Equality tour. I want to thank Harvard Law School's Child Advocacy Program. I want to thank the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute. I want to thank Participant Media and the Waiting for Superman Social Action Campaign for all they've done to make this event great. I want to also thank the Einhorn Family Charitable Trust for their support of this event, as well as the Stewart Foundation, which has been a big supporter of FMC for almost 2 years now. So thank you to all those organizations who have been instrumental in this. This weekend, I stopped by a conference in which there was a man named Pat O'Brien from a group called You Gotta Believe. And basically what that group does is they try to find permanent homes for teenage foster youth. And the reason why he does that is because he contends out of those 2% of Americans, 2% of Americans have been through the foster care system. And he went and looked at a bunch of different studies from around the country and determined that about half of our homeless population has gone through the foster care system at one point or another. So understanding that, we do understand that there's a bullseye to fighting these larger societal ills, And a big part of that, what we've figured out as we've kind of gone forward, is that a place to start that conversation is really in the schools. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to have to play with technology, which is not that easy for me. So please, I want to introduce a clip from the film Waiting for Superman, which kind of talks to us about exactly where our schools are at today. Thank you very much.
Today, there's a crisis in America. It goes beyond healthcare, the economy, and national security. Look a little closer, even right down the street. The crisis that's at the heart of our country is in our schools. Out of 28 reporting developed countries, American students rank 20th in graduation rates. While we were once pioneers in public education, now we've fallen behind. The key to solving all of these problems rests on solving one thing first: education. And the stakes are higher than we think. Here is Miss Robinson. She has 32 students in her class. These kids are the future of our country. But in order to reach their full potential, they need a great education. In America right now, a kid drops out of high school every 26 seconds. That's 3 by the end of this video, and 1.2 million a year. These dropouts are 8 times more likely to go to prison, 50% less likely to vote, more likely to need social welfare assistance, not eligible for 90% of new jobs, are being paid 40 cents to the dollar earned by a college graduate, and continuing the cycle of poverty. This is a frightening picture, but it doesn't have to be. When we change the odds, here's what it looks like. How do we ensure that teachers like Miss Robinson help her students succeed? A solution is possible, and it doesn't just rest on her shoulders. Now that you know what's at stake, what will you do?
Well, we have to fix our schools, and we have to fix our schools for our kids in the foster care system. And fixing schools and improving the success of all students, including those of children in foster care, requires the help of some folks in high places. So if we could say hello to our friends in D.C., that would be wonderful. Coming through? Hello. Hello, Senator Landrieu. Hello, Senator Graf.
Hello.
Hello, Daniel. How are you?
How are you guys doing? Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Doing fine.
We're great.
Senator Landrieu, I wanted to ask you a question. You're a nationally recognized advocate for building families through adoption. You believe that there is no such thing as unwanted children, just unfound families. And you're the co-chair of the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute, a bipartisan group that boasts 155 members and is co-chair of the Senate Caucus on Foster Youth. You are. Senator Landrieu, you've worked with over 1,000 foster youth and have seen the immense difference education has on their success. What are your thoughts on how we can do more to promote educational success?
Well, first of all, Daniel, let me thank you for your really extraordinary leadership and your passion to help reform the foster care system in America, and taking your tremendous skills as a journalist and putting them to excellent use, communicating this issue to a broad audience of Americans that can do something about it, and particularly with the class and audience that you're with today. I want to thank the Dean. Beautiful introduction to this program, and I want to thank Harvard Law Center and Child Advocacy Center for helping to host this important discussion. And I'm very pleased to be here with my wonderful colleague and great partner, Senator Chuck Grassley. He and I have the great privilege of serving as chairs of the foster child and foster care caucus in the Congress. And I also chair the adoption caucus with Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma. So I do double work, and it takes all of us to help promote good changes in this policy. Just a couple of broad thoughts. We do have a challenge in America for improving education across the board from preschool through kindergarten, elementary school, secondary, and higher education. But leaving that subject aside, because the challenges are great and the great opportunity is we're getting ready to reauthorize the major program at the federal level, the reauthorization of the Secondary Education Act. Right now, we're considering that. But Daniel, as you and others have pointed out, for this specific program, our focus is really on the 2% of American children, 1.5% actually, that spend time in the foster care system, who are special, who would need our special care and consideration. And that's because not only has our foster care system failed to provide the kind of permanency for children who are either relinquished or abandoned by their birth parents, or are removed from the care of their birth parents because their parents are harming them in irreparable ways, and so the courts step in to find a new family for these children. We're really failing to do that in the sense that 25,000 of these children, quote, age out of our foster care system every year without a permanent family. So while we're seeing on one side more and more foster care children being adopted, which is wonderful, that number has doubled, if not tripled, in the last 10 years, I like to believe, because of the work that Senator Grassley and I are doing and so many partners around the country. The fact of the matter is the system that is spending about $8 billion a year is not managing to find homes or permanent homes or mentors or families for 25,000 kids that age out every year. And just to back up a few years for those kids, those 18-year-olds that are aging out, some of them, it will be shocking for kids at Harvard to hear this, but some of these kids have gone to 10 different high schools. Is there any question as to why they aren't successful? I mean, if you had to go to 10 different high schools, you probably wouldn't be at Harvard today. That is on top of some of these children having gone to 5 or 6 or 7 elementary schools, because every time they move their foster care family, their school placement usually changes. So one of the things that we're really intent on doing is not only trying to find better quality foster care parents, making that experience temporary the way the law says. You should either go back to your birth parents or forward to an adoptive family. But as we're working on those reforms, we really want to make sure that kids at least get to stay in the school where they can be at least with their teachers and their families and friends. And right now, there's really no law mandating that, and it's one of the things that Senator Grassley and I are working on. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but I'm glad I could give a little bit of background to the importance of not only finding the right family for every child in need, but trying to get them, permanency for their schooling and their education while we're working on trying to find better quality foster parents and options for adoption for these, wonderful children whose families are broken. Doesn't mean they are. Their families are dysfunctional in many cases. It doesn't mean that they're dysfunctional or broken. And as Chuck and I, Senator Grassley and I have seen, so many of these children have extraordinary potential. And it's our job to do everything we can to make the laws and programs work for them, not against them. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. Senator Grassley, my question to you, what are the issues? You are the co-chair of the Senate Caucus on Foster Youth. What are the issues on the top of the caucus's agenda this year, and what have the member of your caucus been doing on this issue in particular, this educational issue?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for sponsoring this program, to you and to Harvard as well. First of all, let me emphasize that from a political standpoint, that this is a lot of bipartisan support, not just evidenced by Senator Landrieu and I working together, but most of the foster care issues in the Congress of the United States have been relatively non-controversial. Now, having said that, you could legitimately ask, well, then why don't we get more done? Well, there's a lot of education that has to go on, and you ask about the caucus that I and Senator Landrieu and I chair. The purpose of it is to concentrate on aging out problems that foster care kids have, but it also deals with the whole longevity of people being in foster care. What can you do so that they're better prepared when they do age out? And I think it's very important that the first step that we do this year is to monitor the implementation of the CONNECT Act that got passed a couple years ago. And the importance of monitoring that is, to make sure that congressional intent is followed, that the bureaucracy is carrying it out the way that we intended. And one of the basic initiatives there is to make sure that state education agencies and state child welfare agencies are working together in the best interests of the foster care kids. And from that standpoint, one of the main purposes of the caucus is to give a voice, a program, and a platform to people that are in foster care. Because I think Senator Landrieu and I learned early on that we really don't understand. We don't listen to the specific complaints of the people that are hurt, the people that are involved, the people that we want to help. And so one of the main purposes of the caucus is to make sure that we have a forum for those people to come and speak out, and hopefully get more of them speaking out in hearings before the various committees of the House and Senate that deal with foster care issues. One step further, I would like to go beyond just getting the state education agencies and the child welfare agencies working together to a greater extent, is to review the Court Improvement Act and see how it's being carried out and whether it's effectively interacting the way it should with the child welfare agency primarily. But we would think that judges would be very much interested in making sure that there's continuity in education when they make decisions affecting kids. Lastly, I would say that we want to move forward with the issue of problems of paying for kids staying within the same school system so they aren't moved around as much as Senator Landrieu just told you, because that continuity is very important. And then I'll stop by just saying where Senator Landrieu started and ended up, because it's the same place I ended up. We need permanence for these kids. Now that comes mostly and best through adoption. But if short of adoption, we got to give people stability.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Grassley. Thank you, Senator Landrieu. I do really we all appreciate the time you've taken to discuss these issues, and we know it will inform our conversation from here on out. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was impressive usage of technology. Something that I've never done before, and that was pretty crazy. Okay, so that being said, before we jump into a panel which is filled with eloquent people, likely as eloquent as Senator Landrieu and Senator Grassley, I'd like to invite up Leah Watson, a third year from Harvard Law School, who is just about to graduate day after tomorrow, who has been helping us at Fostering Media Connections get prepared for this event and all our other events, and been doing a lot of research on the intersection of education and foster care. So please welcome up Leah Watson, who's going to talk to us with a PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm going to go briefly through a PowerPoint, just really addressing the problem that we're here to discuss today, which is the educational underperformance of foster youth. So we begin with our baseline statement that children who are given adequate supports can be great students. This is where Fostering Media Connections and all of the other organizations involved with today's effort agree. And so we're just thinking of ways that we can support children in foster care so that they really have an opportunity to do well. As a little bit of background, on any given day, there are over 423,000 children in foster care across the nation. And throughout the year, there's more than 800,000 children served each year. Through the years, the focus on foster youth has changed. It began with a focus on safety, and as the senator spoke on, that focus on safety has since changed to a focus on permanency. And now we're really focused on well-being of foster youth. Really, how can we help them, support them so that they're able to achieve success in the middle class? And so we really want to give them the opportunities they need in order to do that. Currently, foster youth lag behind their peers on almost every measure of educational opportunity. They are facing significant underperformance, failure, and retention in schools, and so we're here today to discuss ways that foster youth can do better. A little more background on education: 52% of students who were ever in foster care read below grade level compared to 38% of the overall population. This statistic is really important to us because without the ability to read on grade level, students basically have no access to learning. They're not able to understand their textbooks, they're not able to understand what's being asked of them on their standardized tests, and so this is a key statistic that we have to address. Next, other students earn twice as many A's in classes than foster children. So we're interested in this in education on two different levels. We're interested that foster youth are often failing their classes, but we're also interested that they're not succeeding as much as other students. And just to counter that, 10 to 17% of foster youth fail courses, and even more, 40% repeat grades each year. And so we're trying to address the ways that foster youth can pass their classes and even succeed. Finally, nearly half of children in foster care were placed in special education at some point during their education, and this is compared with 12% of all school-age children. So one of the reasons that foster youth are having such a hard time in school is that their placement is being changed. Their school placement is being changed every time their home changes. And this is more than just losing friends. It's about losing friends. It's about losing school records, losing the individual education plans that children in special ed and education have. And so we really want to, one of the ways we target this is by keeping kids in their school of origin. On average, the placement of children in foster care is changed 1 to 2 times per year. One study even estimated that as many as 65% of foster youth change schools at least 7 times during the elementary school through high school. And with each school transfer, on average, students lose 4 to 6 months of academic progress. This last statistic, as you see, 4 to 6 months, on average, students are losing half a year to 1 year each year that they're in foster care. And so not only are we preventing them from progressing, but we're actually holding them back and pushing them back with changing school so often. Another study found that reducing the number of placements each year by just 1 nearly doubled the likelihood that foster child would graduate before leaving care. Next, we're moving on to graduation rates. High school graduation rates are lower for foster youth than their peers. Only over 23% of foster youth dropped out of school before turning 16, compared to the national average of 9%. And 20 to 30% of youth in foster care graduated by age 19, which is significantly lower than the larger population. Even going on to post-secondary education, less than 3% of former foster youth obtained a bachelor's degree. And just to give a little perspective, the lifetime earning potential for a high school dropout is about half that of a high school graduate, which is about 1/3 of a college graduate. So without the ability to attain higher education, these students are really struggling with the ability to get a living wage, and as the senator said, are really overrepresented in receipt of government services. So while we have these sad statistics and unfortunate statistics, we really want to talk about the potential for change tonight. And this potential for change has not been fully tapped. However, Massachusetts has the incredible opportunity for educational success of foster youth. One of the reasons that Massachusetts can really step up as a leader in this movement is because they are experiencing educational success with other students. Massachusetts is normally normally known as the leader in education, and that's because their students are excelling on standardized tests. On the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is the NAEP exam, Massachusetts fourth graders tied for first in science performance in 2009. The eighth graders tied for second in science performing in 2009, and both fourth and eighth graders have scored the highest on reading and math since 2005. The average ACT score of a Massachusetts student is 3 points higher than the national average, and in 2010, public high school students in Massachusetts outscored students in other states on the SAT, with African Americans leading their nationwide peers. Massachusetts schools are having success with closing achievement gaps, but we have to focus on what we can do specifically for youth in foster care. The youth in foster care right now are still 2 times more likely to fail the MCAS, the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, and more than 3 times more likely to receive special education services than their peers. So even though Massachusetts is having a lot of success, we really want to hone in on what we can do for foster care, for children experiencing foster care. Lastly, we're left with our charge. It is clear that here in the Commonwealth and throughout the country, we can do better. We will work to start changing that reality tonight. And I'm going to turn it back over to Daniel to explain more that we can do.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Leah. So now we've gotten some of the background that'll kind of inform our conversation from here on out. So without further ado, I'd like to invite up our guests one by one, our panelists. Angelo McLean. In 2007, Governor Deval Patrick announced the appointment of Mr. McLean as Commissioner of the Department of Children and Families. Mr. McLean was picked up because he's a seasoned child advocate. Thank you, Mr. McLean. Commissioner McLean. Thank you, Commissioner McLean. So sit down. Next up, I'd like to invite up Gail Geringer, who is the child advocate for the Commonwealth. She was appointed by Governor Deval Patrick in 2008. Gail, thank you. I would like to invite Susan Cole. She's the director of the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative, a collaboration of Harvard Law School and Massachusetts Advocates for Children, a nonprofit children's rights organization. Susan. In addition, I would like to invite up Diane Curran, Senior Associate General Counsel for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Thank you, Diane. And last but not least, I'd like to invite up Sixto Cancel, who's coming all the way from Bridgeport, Connecticut. He's 19 years old, and he's currently in the foster care system in Connecticut. Thank you, Sixto. So I'm just going to jump into some questions for you guys, okay? And that's how we're going to ground the conversation, if that's all right with you. Is that all right? Great. Commissioner McLean, how are you?
Hello, good evening.
Thanks for being here. In July of 2010, the Administration of Children and Families issued guidance on the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008. This is the act that the senators referenced before. This guidance included increased clarity on the role of public child welfare agencies in providing for the educational stability of students experiencing foster care. So this is the feds talking about how child welfare administrations need to focus on the educational stability of children in foster care. The guidance included an assurance that foster care coordinates, and now I quote, with a local education agency or agencies to ensure that the child can remain in that school, or if remaining in that school is not in the best interest of the child, an assurance to enroll the child immediately in a new school with all of his or her educational records. Now this, I've seen across the country, is a very difficult thing to accomplish, so maybe you could tell us, here in Massachusetts, what are the aids and barriers to the successful implementation of these aspects of fostering connections?
Thank you. I'm looking for a sign so I can see how many minutes I have. It's really wonderful to see so many people here who are interested in talking about improving educational and academic success for children in the foster care system. It's really heartwarming to see that. We actually were at an event earlier today where we were celebrating foster parents who had been fostering for over 30 years, and we heard from a panel of youth, and some of the things they talked about. I want to just mention, one of the youth talked about how important it is that we have expectations of foster kids that they can do well, and that sometimes they live up or down to the expectations we have for them. Another one of our foster youth talked about the importance of normalizing that foster care experience, that foster kids is like other kids or normal kids. And a lot of times, we talk about 2% of the folks in the country having had a foster care experience, where there are many, many more folks who've had an out-of-home experience. And you can think of in our own families where there's many times when the family needs some help to where so we can normalize that experience. It's not such a bad thing to be in an out-of-home situation. Although we do everything we can to eliminate the number of children we remove, and across the country, we've seen about a 10% reduction in the number of kids coming into the foster care system. And here in Massachusetts, we've seen that we have about 2,000 fewer kids today than we did 3 or 4 years ago. Some of the barriers are sort of transportation. How do you figure out the transportation? Which school, is it the sending school, the receiving school that's going to be responsible for the cost of transportation, or is it the child welfare agency that's going to be responsible? Sort of, if a child does need to enroll in a new school, how quickly can they enroll? How quickly can you get the transfer information over? But I think there are those technical issues that we need to address, and we will find solutions for those. But on top of those technical issues are issues of trauma. These kids have experienced trauma and stress, so how do we have an environment where they can be welcomed into that environment, and those issues of trauma can be understood and addressed? Because a lot of times when they're failing to perform, there's some unresolved trauma and stress issues that are there. And then looking at ways of how they can be accepted into those new environments, whether they're staying in their original school or going to a new school. They've got a new status now, and how does that not translate into being picked on, bullied, or somehow being perceived as different? So I think those are some of the issues there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned the school environment and how to access that school environment where children experiencing foster care can feel safe and welcomed. And that's a good way to start talking to Susan Cole, if that's all right with you, Susan. What key insights have you learned from your work on behalf of traumatized children that you think is applicable to this particular subpopulation of children experiencing foster care?
Well, one clear contribution from the work on trauma and learning is that children in foster care must be provided access to safe and supportive whole school environments. As Mr. McLean just said, we know that many children living in foster care have had traumatic experiences, so trauma sensitivity and sensitivity to the needs of children in foster care are very closely related. And it's true with trauma generally, and certainly adding in the chaos that can accompany foster care placement, that schools have to help children feel safe at school. And when we talk about safe at school, as Mr. McLean was just saying, we're talking about physical safety, but we're also talking about emotional safety, social safety, and academic safety. When children's brains are focused on perceived threats in the environment, they can run into real problems at school. A child trying to gain agency, for example, over an unpredictable environment might act out in aggressive ways. A child trying to avoid stressful situations might resort to staring out windows and even dissociating. Other children can become perfectionists and do very, very well, but still suffer inside. However, when children feel safe, then their brains can calm down. And when this happens, they're available for learning, for good behavior, for making friends, all of which helps make a successful school experience. Now, to enable children to feel safe, schools have got to create safe, supportive environments with embedded services that help children feel connected to the community, not segregated or pushed away or sent down the hall to be fixed. It's where they can feel a sense of belonging a sense of predictability, and where they can learn to trust adults who are caring for and educating them. Again, the key answer is that children require safe, supportive environments. So helping schools create these kind of environments is what we need to focus on. Whole school efforts must include everyone, from the principal to the cafeteria workers, and they have to involve the whole community, from families to community agencies. We need professional development and much more. In effect, it requires a whole infrastructure at school to make this happen. So later, I won't speak about this now, but later, I hope I have the opportunity to talk about the infrastructure that's being designed in Massachusetts through the Task Force on Schools and Behavioral Health to create a framework across our state to help create these environments.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much. Gail, you know, just last week, Gail and I were, and a whole bunch of other people were together at Western New England College. And Gail, you know, during that meeting we had, you said that the state, you know, doesn't do a very good job at being a parent. And from your vantage point as the advocate in the Commonwealth, what do you think inhibits the system from adequately preparing children in foster care from being successful in education?
Well, as the child advocate now and as a former juvenile court judge and as a parent, perhaps this is the most important thing I bring to the parent of 3 young adults. I think we all know what an anchor school can be. And when it's going well, things seem to be going well in other parts of a child's life. And certainly the converse is true. If school isn't going well, then a lot of other things flow from that. And I think that everyone who works with children appreciates the important role that education plays. But I don't think that we as a state, and I'll go on to explain in a minute, and I don't think I need to, looking around the audience, I think you know what's coming from me, is that parenting is a really very difficult job. I think for any parent of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children, we can all attest to that. Being an aunt who's involved, or an uncle involved, or a cousin involved in a child's life, and taking on part of that quasi-parenting role. It's very difficult trying to really figure out what's going on in a child's life, how that's affecting that child's learning, and how what happens at school then affects the rest of the day for the child. And I think that when I said that the state doesn't do a great job of parenting, it's starting with the premise that parenting for a parent with 1 child is a very, very difficult job. But if we compound that and we really mean what we say about really trying to take on the role of becoming a parent for children, youth in foster care, it's that we have so many people with different pieces of that child's life trying to really, in good faith, do what's best for that child. But I think it's our overall inability to really integrate the school environment with the home environment, which gets compounded, as we know, by the multiple placements. It's really having someone held accountable for pulling together the different pieces, the different aspects, and making them sort of all be supportive, having that good communication. And I think that the other thing is we have not done a good job of listening to youth and listening to foster parents and trying to really work collectively and collaboratively with child welfare. And I think of child welfare in a very global sense as opposed to child protection work. How can we all really figure out how to address the needs of that particular child and youth and have someone consistently held accountable for making sure that the various pieces are tied together in a way that's going to enable that child or youth to get on and be successful. And I think that we also have to be open as to what success means. I do think we have to set high expectations. Over and over again, we heard that at this morning's program. I think that we sometimes think, well, we can't expect too much. That child went through a lot. Or, GED would be fine, but maybe that would be the way for them to go rather than getting a high school diploma. And I think that's just wrong. I mean, I think we start with the assumption that with good supports, good opportunities, consistency, that kids in foster care are going to be able to succeed in whatever it is they choose to do with the support of all of us behind them. It's that lack of coordination, that lack of accountability, the lack of anyone really pulling together all the pieces the way a good parent tries to do for his or her child. And we know how difficult that is. That's what I see as the major problem from the point of view of the Office of the Child Advocate, which is supposed to take kind of a 360 view and looking at the whole child, trying to look at the individual issues, but also then system-wide issues that are interfering or impeding with the ability of children and youth to succeed in school and in life. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane, so you sit from a position where you are now Associate General Counsel at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And you come from a background where you were working in a similar position at the Department of Social Services, which is now the Department of Children and Families, where Commissioner McLean to your left is now Commissioner. So understanding that, those two sides of the coin, and kind of going back to the statistics that Leah mentioned, which we're talking about very high achievement rates in the Department of Elementary Secondary Education. And while they could be beating national education rates for children in foster care in some counts, you still have this kind of stark achievement gap. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, kind of seeing both sides, what you think some of the barriers are there.
Well, I think that the barriers are my fellow panelists have identified many of the barriers that exist to foster care children succeeding in education. The mobility issue is one that can't be overstated in my view, because we think about a child who moves with his or her family in the course of a school year and how difficult it is for that child remaining with his or her family to a new school district. And it's a culture change. It's a matter of being introduced to new teachers and having teachers become familiar with their academic work and so on and so forth when their families walk in with perhaps a pile of educational records. Now, we talk about foster children moving sometimes at very difficult times of the year with respect to their education, maybe before the end of a semester, and maybe this is a move that's necessary because of some emergency that's happened, and having to get acclimated to a new school system, and having to provide records, and having school administrators and teachers get to know that child very quickly, and then have to experience another move within 4 or 5 months. It's a very difficult period of time for a student to adjust, focus on education, and make progress. And similarly for teachers to really get to know that student's learning style, for the records to catch up, for that student to be familiar with them in terms of their past academic success. I think that is one of the difficult issues that we face and have to do better with. So the issue of attachment to schools of origin and the continued ability to remain in at least the school that a child is familiar with is most important. And so we have these issues that the Commissioner mentioned with respect to transportation, working out how are we going to transport when all of the parties are agreed that this is what makes sense for that child. This is the piece of stability that is important for that child, that while that child goes through this difficult time in terms of having been removed from his family. How are we going to resolve that? How are we going to deal with the financial burdens placed during a time when there's just not enough money to go around, and who's going to be responsible? We do need better linkages to community supports. We need to bring in, and we have to recognize, again, we have to have trauma-informed practice. We have to bring that into the schools and help teachers understand and be aware of what that means in terms of that individual student's capacity to succeed at that point in time. At the same time, and I'm glad it's been mentioned today, we have to recognize that and find and identify and obtain the information necessary to see what that child's island of competence is within the school, within the classroom. It's an expression that I'm very partial to, that student, that we set high expectations, that we see the educational potential in the child while balancing this issue of need for support and to get through a very difficult time. So we have a lot to do with working to provide academic and behavioral health supports for those students who need them.
Thank you. Thank you. Forgive me, I'm going to have to go through some technical jumping through hoops, but I think it's important because before we get to Sixto, we're kind of getting this feeling that there's a lot to be done, and we're looking for that person to do it. So I'm going to bring you guys back to a clip from the film, Waiting for Superman. So please bear with me as I pull that up. Thank you very much.
One of the saddest days of my life was when my mother told me Superman did not exist. I was a comic book reader, and I read comic books, and I just loved them, because even in the depths of the ghetto, you just thought, he's coming, I just don't know when, because he always shows up and he saves all the good people and they never end up. I was reading, I don't know, maybe I was in the 4th grade. My mother, I was like, Mom, you think Superman is not real? I was like, he's not. What do you mean no, he's not real? And she thought I was crying because it's like Santa Claus is not real. And I was crying because there was no one coming with enough power to save us. Kids look at the world and they make certain predictions based on the evidence they're receiving from their peers, from their parents, and from their teachers. From their perspective, the world is a heartless, cold-blooded place because they realize they've been given the short end of the stick and they don't know why.
So that brings us to our friend Sixto. And Sixto, I wanted to bring you up after that clip because I think that, I've seen across this country, everywhere we've traveled through fostering media connections and meeting so many great people, whether it's in Western Mass and whether it's Paul Burnham at Orange Public Schools or Judy Cockerton or whoever else is amassed in here. We found that there are amazing things going on, but, and a lot of that is embedded in the youth themselves. So we're very proud to have Sixto here, and we're very much looking forward to hearing what he has to say about the work he's doing in Bridgeport to kind of be that Superman. So Sixto, please.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say I'm very honored to be here, especially at Harvard, but honored just to be advocating more for education for our youth in foster care. I'm very excited because a lot of great things are happening in Connecticut and in Bridgeport also. One of the things that happened last summer is that I came across a study called the Midwest Study. Most of you may know it as this huge research on a lot of different statistics on our youth. And what I found was one starting statistic that really blew me away, and that was that only 3% of our children end up getting a bachelor's degree. That right there just blew me away because I'm thinking, here goes the state spending all this money to do A, B, and C, and D with us, and less than 97% of us don't even get a 4-year degree. So it really started with me, and before that, I knew something was going on. I'm chair of the Youth Leadership Board in Bridgeport, and so I'm at DC at the Department of Children and Families a lot. And so we meet there a lot, and I kept seeing some of our kids return from college over and over and over, and I kept asking myself, what's going on? Did they switch? Did they drop out? And soon enough, I started to realize that most of our kids were returning home because they either failed out, got kicked out, or just couldn't do that type of work. So I started a SAT prep program with one of my teachers. And at the time, of course, everybody was talking about this recession, and there was no money to do A, B, and C. So I went to one of my teachers and I begged her, listen, can you please volunteer once a week to do SAT prep with us. And for 2 years, we did that SAT prep program, and we had our kids from all over Fairfield County and some even from the county, New Haven County, come down to Bridgeport at my school. And she volunteered her time, and 2 other teachers got involved also and volunteered their time. Last summer, I decided that it was time that we demand a bit more. I started to learn more about the consequences of not having the right education, how most of our kids end up on welfare and most of our kids end up on public assistance. So that's when we came up with the idea of Stellar's work, which was at first supposed to be a college transitional program, which became a remedial program because what we did not realize is how far our kids are behind. One thing I kept in mind through all this is that there was a recession going on because everybody kept telling me there's no way you're going to be able to create a program in the middle of a recession and get the funding for it. Unfortunately, they were wrong. In fact, the state decided to fund $17,500 for this program. What we also did, and the reason why it was successful was because we got agencies in the community. I met with agency after agency because they provided a service that our kids needed. So whether it was mentors, so our kids can have someone calling them, making sure that their education's on track, whether it was music therapy and etc., we had those agencies represented at the table, and we came together to figure out who was going to do what so we can have a low-cost program that has been running since January and will end in 3 weeks. So the program has been successful. We had private donor, should I say, and so we had a total of $22,500 that went towards this program to work with our kids to be caught up to grade level when everyone said it really wasn't going to happen. And I think that we have to demand more. One of the things that I witnessed with change comes a lot of resistance, and a lot of people don't realize if we don't invest in our future, we're going to have a pretty screwed up future. We pay a lot more if we don't invest now into our kids' education than later when they suffer in our child welfare, in our other systems.
Thank you, Sixto. Thank you. When I was 19, I was at UC Santa Barbara hanging out by the beach. I was definitely not planning a program to ensure that my peers were getting through college. So that's the kind of superpower that we could be unleashing if we gave all our children adequate supports all the way through. And this is, of course, a very hard thing to do. Commissioner Commissioner McLean, very sorry. But from your perspective, I know you guys have been doing quite a bit of work on the permanency side of things and kind of across the board and being very progressive in a lot of child welfare policy, and which kind of puts you in a strong position to focus a bit on education. So maybe you could take us now, we move into solutions more, maybe you could talk to us a little bit more about what you're doing on the ground right now to push this forward.
Okay. One of the things we've been working on is something we call our Placement and Educational Stability Initiative. When we were looking at some of our performance data, we saw that we weren't doing very well in the area of placement stability, and we said we've got to do better in terms of making sure kids have fewer moves. And we said we can do better. We know if we place more of our children with kin. When we looked at the kids who were placed with kin, their placement stability was like at a 95% rate compared to other kids whose first placements were other than kin, and their placement stability was around about a 75%. So we said we know we can place more kids with kin. We know when we looked at for children of color, we were even less successful, so we know we could place more of our kids of color with kin. And as we start having this discussion about placement stability, we said, while we're at it, we might as well look at educational stability because, education is just as important as the, having that safe and stable home. So our, core to that is educational stability. And as we're having this discussion today, one of the things that's occurring to me is as we look about sort of looking at some of the measures for outcomes, in terms of how successful our educational stability program is, we can look to see, are we closing that achievement gap, for our foster kids, or are their scores on the MCAS increasing? And we were looking at some of the MCAS data, even though our kids really do lag behind the MCAS data. One thing we did see was the longer that they're in care, their they begin to catch up. So there's some catching up work that we can do, and I like your ideas about having the mentors and the tutors and so forth. And we've been able to provide that through what we call a DCF Kids Fund, and it's sort of a private, someone will give me the letters. Anyway, it's a private arm of the department where we can actually go out and raise private funds so we can support kids in those extracurricular activities, dance, athletics, SAT, training to their. Another thing we're looking at is Commissioner Chester and I have commissioned a work group, an interagency work group, that's putting together frequently asked questions related to the Fostering Connections Act in terms of how we implement it. And we're going to put out a joint letter from the two of us talking about the importance of it. And also we're going to have a memorandum of understanding, so when the local child welfare and local educational folks get together and want to have this in place by September, they're not having to make it up from scratch. They actually have a template that they can use and that they can follow. One of the things we have in Massachusetts is within our 29 areas, we have educational liaisons, and really linking up those educational liaisons with liaisons in the schools. Over the last 5 years, we've had something called Integrated Comprehensive Resources in Schools. It was really a 5-year project, and we were in 9 school districts, and basically it was a joint collaborative between the Department of Early and Secondary Education and the Department of Children and Families, where they actually sent us over $2 million, and we contracted with providers, and what we're able to do is put a full-time social worker in the school, and that social worker's job was be the contact person for the education personnel to help address behavioral issues, social issues, and to sort of run the interference that if there was anything going on with the child or the family that would be a distraction from a child achieving academically, that there was that go-to person that the school personnel could go to. And we learned quite a bit from that 5-year project, most of which we learned was a model of how to collaborate when we come together. One of the things that we've been able to do successfully here is really encourage our kids, and Connecticut is also a leader in this area, along with some other states like North Carolina and New Mexico, have been able to support kids between the age of 18 and 22 as they hit that transition age, to be able to offer concrete support in the terms of a adolescent outreach worker who can be there for them, in terms of tuition and fee waivers that our legislature has passed, and to the point of also paying what we call youth support payments, where whether it be $300 a month, $500 a month, $600 a month, to support that child while they're in school. But there's much more that I'm looking for a time. Oh, there's that. I'm sure you're about to put a sign up here.
Thank you, Commissioner McLean. I mean, we just heard that you guys are working towards a memorandum of understanding, and you guys are going to work jointly. You guys have been working jointly on the implementation of Fostering Connections educational stability mandates, which, I mean, we've traveled around the country, and that's not ubiquitous. I mean, it's not everywhere. It's very varied in the way that different administrations are dealing with this very kind of tough and difficult issue, which does in part fall around transportation sometimes. So, Diane, in your work, you must be in on these meetings. So what is the answer with transportation? Is there an answer with transportation? What can we learn from McKinney-Vento?
Well, I don't believe we have an answer to transportation as yet in this state. In our state, under McKinney-Vento, foster children in certain kinds of placement, such as the STAR programs. Thank you. I've forgotten my language here. STAR programs, which are designed to be a temporary placement, are considered homeless under McKinney-Vento. So they have the right to go or remain in their school of origin, and transportation is worked out between the districts. But as for other children in foster placements, we have not yet worked out the issue of transportation in terms of who would provide that transportation and pay for it. So we're still working on that.
Well, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean,
Yes, it's
you know,
a
I mean,
very tough one.
it's kind of the linchpin of all of this. I mean, it's a very tough piece. On the federal level, you know, Al Franken put forward a bill, the Fostering Success in Education Act, which talked about this and talked about putting the burden of the transportation on the Child Welfare Administration.
Right.
You know, and so it's a difficult call, clearly. But so what you're saying is that through McKinney-Vento, you've been able to, the children in awaiting placement situations have been able to be transported, correct?
Yes, children in those kinds of homes that appear to be transitional by design are entitled to be transported. Yeah.
Commissioner Chester? I mean, Commissioner McLean, sorry.
I just wanted to comment on the funding piece. We haven't worked out the funding. We sort of have a scenario for Plan A, B, or C. Plan C, the funding would actually default to the Child Welfare Agency, and we would find some way, we're not sure how, to pay that transportation cost. Or hopefully we can get the definition of who's in temporary living under McKinney-Vento expanded. We've had some discussions with two of our senators, Senator Rosenberg and Senator Spilka, about supporting legislation that would put more of a requirement on the Child Welfare Agency to step up if we can't work out sort of the federal funding. But we're not going to let the funding be the impediment to making this happen.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. Susan, in terms of getting young people to schools, you mentioned this framework, and I'm kind of wondering if you could expand on that and talk about, you know, how you create school environments. Really, what are you guys doing on the ground here in Massachusetts to create those school environments that would be helpful?
Well, you know, school goes a long way toward creating safe and supportive environments when they engage in a deliberate process involving strategic planning. Now, Mr. McLean just mentioned the ICRS program, which are these beautiful programs, and they were run by Susan Stelk, who's in the back of the room right now. But they're being defunded. And the question is, how do you go beyond even poetic pockets of excellence that never become universal across our state? And what Massachusetts has been doing to try to address this is been working hard to develop an organizational tool schools can use to create whole school environments, you know, that enable all children, including those in foster care, to succeed. And I've been privileged to be on the task force on schools and behavioral health, which was set up by law to create a framework for, quote, creating safe, supportive school environments with collaborative services, just the environment we've been discussing. So our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, along with many members of state agencies and citizens, you know, has been working on developing this framework and recognizing, you know, that we can't just go out and buy a program and expect to fix schools the way, you know, it's to make them work for foster children. Actually, such a program might only marginalize foster children more. What we need is a framework that works for all kids while addressing the particular needs of foster children as well as other children who might be homeless and have other issues. Now, this framework that's been developed, and it's been adapted from law, contains 6 elements. And the 6 elements provide the school with a way to consider each part of their organizational structure that's necessary to create whole school organizational change. So these 6 elements are, remember, this is rather than going out and buying a glossy program or expecting to create more pockets. The 6 elements are leadership, professional development, access to resources and services, academic and non-academic approaches, so we can really get into the classroom and change approaches so that we can help children be successful. Policies and protocols to sustain these efforts so they don't start and then stop, and family engagement, which is so critical. So this framework's been developed. It's up on the website at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We can get Dan the site to the link if you'd like to see it. And already what we're finding is Massachusetts has incorporated the framework into many statewide education reform initiatives. The model plan for bullying was organized according to the framework. The special ed advisory on bullying also. The regulations surrounding our turnaround schools have been organized according to the framework, and there's now legislation passed. Has not passed. Let me strike that. There's legislation pending that would ensure that schools use a framework approach to create safe and supportive environments using the tool that's been developed to welcome all children. So I invite you to look at that legislation and join our efforts to make this happen across our state.
Wonderful. Sixto, you look like you wanted to chime in there. I mean, you're the foil to all these great ideas. So what's your impression?
Well, first, I hear a lot of great ideas, but one thing I would like to know is what type of youth engagement and what type of youth are at the table. Secondly, I know that what Connecticut, our Connecticut Voices for Children, our youth board actually worked with them on legislation, and it was passed that if a school is located within 25 miles of the child's new placement, then as long as it was in the best interest of the child, then they are allowed to stay at that school. So those are the two things that came to mind when I hear the reactions of the panelists, I say.
Gail, do you have any ideas in terms of what steps are being taken, what can be taken? I mean, we had some pretty substantive ones to get to where Sixto is trying to get us in terms of what the commissioner said. So, what steps beyond that will get us to this place that we want to get to?
Well, let me just say that the Office of the Child Advocate very much supports the framework that Susan Cole has just mentioned, and this is something that's applicable to all kids, all kids. And I think that I'm going to just put my remarks aside and just kind of talk for a minute. I think if there's anything that I've seen in the 3 years I've been at the Office of the Child Advocate is how much is going on in Massachusetts for children and for youth in foster care. But again, they're little pieces, and I hate the term silos, but we have early education and care doing some wonderful things. We have elementary and secondary education doing some terrific things. We have the Department of Children and Families doing some wonderful things. Most people don't know what wonderful things the other is doing. As we move, we have this vantage point of being sort of 360, trying to really get a picture. It is very, very difficult to get a picture of what we actually have in the Commonwealth, either at a statewide level or within a school district or within a community. And I think that one of the things we have been pushing is we have to look at kids up through the continuum, just as a parent would, okay? A young child comes into care. Has there been early intervention? If not, are they going to get the early intervention? What are we going to do to get them ready as they move out of early intervention so that it's seamless in going on to an IEP if that's where they're going? What are we going to do to work with the elementary school to make sure when they come in, that they have what they need? And then you compound that with the fact that they're going to come back to. There is no one person or entity that's really looking out for the whole child and trying to figure out how to pull together the different pieces from the different systems. And I think, that is what we need to do. Now, the question is obviously, how do we go about doing that? And what I'd like to do is cede any time I have to open this up, because I'd really like to come out of here with some action steps. I think the best thing that came out of the Springfield was really coming up with some concrete suggestions of things that could either be done at the statewide level or things that are happening in communities that could perhaps be expanded to, be used to broaden that initiative statewide. I'm going to cede my time. I think we've got a lot of people here when we open it up for questions and comments who hopefully are going to tell us about some things that we should be looking at to integrate into our puzzle here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to open it up. I mean, I just wanted to get from the panel, this notion that we're looking at children experiencing foster care and their educational attainment. And something that has not, that I think needs to come across, or that should come across, is that we're talking about school reform here too. I mean, we're talking about what is the window that this issue offers into larger school reform. We're talking about the aggregation of the most achievement gaps, dropout rates, school mobility, all these things that if you read what the President's put out and what the Secretary of Education is talking about, all these things that apply to all across the school system. So just before we get to the floor, how, why is it important, this window? What does this window tell us about the overarching education system?
Well, I think it simply tells us that we have to do better, but I think we need, with the Commissioner, that we need to look more closely at data. We need to get data, we have to break it down, we need to figure out who's succeeding, and we have to look at those successes, and we have to look at where we're not succeeding, and we have to analyze that and try to figure out strategies to resolve it. But I don't think we have the data that we need to take a look at, in Massachusetts, as to how kids in foster care are really doing from an educational perspective. Do you agree with that?
I was going to say, one of the things it tells us about the larger educational system in Massachusetts, and Susan said something about poetic pockets of excellence. I wrote that down somewhere. But in Massachusetts, when you look across the state at all students, we've got this really big pocket of excellence in terms of academic achievement. And we saw some, first in this, second in this. And then we've got this gap of kids at the other end. So we've got this really doing really good, this huge gap, and then this group of kids who aren't doing so well. And whether that be kids in urban areas, kids who are families who are struggling with poverty, or certain kids within the foster care system. So in some ways we're saying we've got these populations, and we have to figure out for these populations what are going to be those pockets of poetic excellence for them. What are the 2 or 3 things that we need to do to be able to close that gap? And I think one of the encouraging things is, we have a governor who's been really committed to education, and really demonstrated by, as we've been cutting the budget, on many things, a steady commitment to education, created a secretariat for education, and the Secretary of Human Service and the Secretary of Education have come together and have created a children's readiness cabinet looking at how do you close the gap. Just for instance, there are 40 identified underperforming schools, and there's been a concentrated effort to do turnaround plans for those 40 underperforming schools, and we have seen I want to say 4, maybe as many as 10 schools who've had a turnaround plan, who've actually been able to turn around and get better achievement.
Wonderful. And maybe each one of the panelists could kind of give us their summation of thoughts before we open it up to the floor. It would be really great to kind of hear from all of you briefly about what you're thinking. And then I think Gail is right in kind of driving the conversation to a place where we start taking advantage of all the brains in this room, whether they're from education, foster care, or wherever, who can help us push this conversation forward. So any closing thoughts, Sixto?
Definitely. I think that what's going on is great because the conversation's out there. One of the things I experienced was when I was trying to create this program together, I really felt like no one really knew what was going on until I met great people like you who really put this issue at the forefront. And a lot of different initiatives are going on around the world. On June 2nd, I know the NEKC Board and the National Association of Education, we're having a convene and talking about how is it that the welfare system and the educational system can work together, the national organizations can work together to service our foster youth. So it's great that I think that this is coming at the right time when we need reform, when we need to reform our educational system, when we need to reform our foster care system. And I hope to see greater things happen from this, and I hope to have our youth involved in every step of the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I think we have to get out of our silos, and we have to realize that every year we throw at schools a new initiative, Last year it was bullying. This year it's going to be dropout prevention, truancy. We could go and throw at them foster care, homelessness. We can keep doing that. Or else we can stop and say, look, most of these initiatives, most of these, what needs to be done for dropout prevention needs to be done for foster care and needs to be done for truancy. There are certain actions that schools need to take that are cross-cutting, and these initiatives need to be woven together into a whole that results in a whole school safe, supportive environment that can welcome foster care kids appropriately. This takes work, it takes determination, it takes an organizational structure, it takes coalition building within the school and work with families and communities. And I think as long as we keep saying, okay, let's find a piece of data and do something to solve that piece of data, and we can't step back and say, what is this whole school environment? Everyone wants to be part of a whole school environment. Everyone wants to be welcomed. Every child wants to be welcomed. Well, foster care kids tell us they don't feel welcome. And that is not a small little piece of action. That's a whole school, large-scale commitment that requires organizational change. It doesn't necessarily require a lot of money. It requires an organizational change effort. And again, I'd like to take a look at the framework that's up at the Department of Education, Behavioral Health in Schools framework, and come join the effort to weave these initiatives together and stop burdening schools, but help them to create trauma-sensitive, safe, supportive environments.
Go for it, Gail.
Go for it,
yeah.
I think from my point of view that we have to somehow, we have such a push for MCAS scores, let's be blunt, and academic achievement as measured by MCAS scores. And I think somehow we have to figure out how to link what Susan's talking about, which is a sea change in terms of attitudes about a safe, supportive school environment for all kids. And we have to convince people that in fact that would lead to better learning and better performance or better success in school that has to be measured by more than just MCAS scores. So for me, it's the integration of the push toward achievement and how we're measuring that with the understanding that if we create the kinds of safe, supportive environments for all kids, that it will result in better scores, but what we're more importantly, in better outcomes for kids. So it's this somehow incorporating the kinds of principles that are there in the framework, but at the same time, it's very hard to, I'm so excited about tonight because it's not so often that we get education and human services in the same room. There are too many discussions going on that aren't co-joint discussions, and some of the school's response is, well, the kids need more services, so you send them out for more services. But it's really an overall integration of an approach to learning that is going to result in better outcomes for all kids and giving whatever extra supports any kid needs, and that obviously includes kids in foster care. But I also think it's a mistake, because I think a lot of people, a kid in foster care comes to a school or a community and it's like, uh-oh, we've got a problem child. And I think that we have to do a lot to dispel that notion. And we have to do a lot of educating around the fact that if you look at the adverse life experience study, probably 1 in every 3 of us has had something that impacts our ability to maximize our potential. And if we're lucky, we get supports to overcome those things. And that's what we've got to look for in everybody. What is it that's interfering with your ability to learn in school, and how can we give you what you need to be successful? And that includes discussions like this, but getting concrete with plans to really instill that attitude in the schools, and I support the idea, I know it is to build that function of a liaison within the school who really is somebody who, it isn't a social worker, it isn't a nurse, although it could be, but it's really broadening and supporting that function and building those connections so that everybody knows what supports are available and can offer those to kids when they need them. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. I was this morning, one of our graduates, alumni, talked about life as a struggle and to embrace the struggle. And as the leader of the Child Welfare Agency, I wasn't going to say Anthony, but he's there. We were paying attention to you, Anthony. But solving this is going to be a struggle, and we're no stranger to struggles, and we've seen that when we concentrate and focus on things, we're able to come out on the other end of those struggles with something positive. So I'm looking forward to continuing this discussion. And as I said, our number one goal for the coming year, and it may go into the next couple of years, is really improving on placement and educational stability. And we're obviously embedded in that is closing that achievement gap.
As I sit here tonight, I can't help but think about when I was at Department of Social Services. I think it was 1998. It was and during the time I was there, I worked on education issues affecting children in foster care with Susan Stelk, among others. And I remember when the Adoption and Safe Families Act was passed, and the concepts of safety, permanency, well-being were included in that law. And in well-being, there was reference for the first time to education. And some of us were delighted to see that. And that, I think, was in 1998. And I have to tell you, from my perspective, having been at the Department of Social Services, now Children and Families, and now back at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, it's wonderful to participate in an event like this. To have the spotlight on education and how we can do more to work on academic achievement of children in foster care. I think we have made a lot of progress, obviously, over the last 13 years or so, and with education coordinators or liaisons and 29 areas offices and having discussions between our agencies. We have to do more, of course, and my primary comment would be to echo Susan Cole's comment, as well as Gail Garringer's, about simplifying this, and that is about assuring that schools are safe and supportive learning environments. I was speaking about bullying in another setting a couple of weeks ago, and somebody was making the comment that, oh my goodness, I was a teacher. I remember how hard it was to really remember all my responsibilities and to become familiar with all different programs. And my comment was, well, it's really simple. Let's reduce it to its most simple elements, and that is providing safe and supportive environment for children. That's what we do. If we do that, we cannot go wrong. I would say that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has now had for a couple of years, the board is committed to taking a look at what we call a proficiency gap. We know about the kids who are succeeding. We are looking more closely now at the groups of students who are not. We can do more. We can talk more. We can talk about how we can get better data on students who are in foster care, and look at all of it's a complicated look. I appreciate that because of the amount of time that students spend in foster care, and whether it's a short-term placement or a longer-term placement, and looking at success rate. It is a little more complex, but we can do better, and I'm sure we will. Thank you.
Thank you to the panel for the conversation and your thoughts. I mean, I want to just make it kind of emphatic here that my comprehension is not as an expert. It's coming in as a journalist initially, and then starting to learn a little bit about education slowly but surely. But it's clear that child welfare, if I, in the study of legislation that's passed and statistics and the lives of children, has gotten into a position where we can have this conversation about education. So I think it's important to acknowledge the bedrock that the Department of Children and Families has been in making sure that that conversation can even happen. So thanks to the department, thanks for being here, and thanks for supporting children. So with that being said, we would love, as Gail said, to hear from you guys in the audience. And there's 2 microphones up there, and I see Judge Blitzman is itching to go. So so we'll let him go. But there's 2 microphones, and we'd love to hear from you guys and get some solutions from you. I think she beat you to the punch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it on? Okay, great. My name is Lisa Lessard Pearson, and I'm the president of Foster Care Alumni of America's Massachusetts chapter. Foster Care Alumni of America is funded by the Casey Family Programs. And I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself because I am the they that this group is talking about. I am an alumni of the foster care system, and I want to take a moment and acknowledge anyone else who is an alum of the foster care system and ask you to please stand up. If you're an alum or if you are in foster care, please stand up. It is very unusual to have an opportunity to recognize and to applaud an experience that's often associated with shame, with guilt, with being in the closet, with not wanting to be the other. When I was in high school, I did everything possible to make sure no one thought I was any different than they were. I made up the lies about who my mom and dad was. I made up the lies about when we changed homes, when I changed homes, when I was changing schools. It's not just about education, folks. When a foster child moves from school to school, they change the neighborhood they're in, the parents they have, the culture of the family that they're in. What rules you have in your family, that changes from home to home. And foster children have to learn those new rules. They also have to learn the directions of where they're going every day. They have to learn the new curriculum, and they have to learn who the new workers are in their lives, because the workers burn out, and they change frequently. I'm here to tell you, as foster children, we're looking for Superman in life, not just in education. When I realized that there was no one that was going to be there for me, and I was truly on my own, it wasn't until I got into Foster Care Alumni of America and met other alumni like myself and realized, my God, we have a culture and a language all our own that I don't know you understand exists. When a very brief example, and the foster children and alumni will get this. The question is, what is the official luggage of foster care? If you're a foster kid, what's the official luggage? Who
Garbage
knows?
bags.
Garbage bags, hefty, is our luggage. That's the official luggage of choice. Everybody in here that's had this experience knows it. So what I'm asking, Susan brought up a very interesting list, and we wrote it down. I'm, by the way, part of the less than 2%. I have an MBA, so
I shouldn't be this special. Thank you. And with several colleagues of mine, one from Harvard who is also an alum, who's graduated with a degree in. Go ahead. Oh, they're going to be very quiet on me. They're all very spectacular people. This is what I'll say. You brought up a list of leadership, professional development, access to services, academic and non-academic approaches, policies, protocols to sustain services, family engagement. I urge you to add one more. Role models. We need to see ourselves as adults because foster kids grow up. And there are millions of us. And it should be in this forum that we finally see each other, get to touch each other, and recognize, my God, there are others. We need to be a part of this, not just kids in care now, but alums, every step of the way, helping formulate a stronger community and a stronger educational system for kids in care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alexis Rodriguez. I'm a foster care alumni member.
I'm going to ask you to talk up. This is the first time she's ever talked publicly, and she's very afraid. She's afraid of you, and she's an alum. So tell her she doesn't need to be afraid.
Don't need to be afraid.
Okay. I just had a question for the members. Is there any support groups or programs out there for the parents of the biological children that go in foster care? For example, like if my parents had support of how to, raise children, and I'm sure not just foster children go through that with parents, that need assistance, or not just welfare, or, but actually support on like how to take care of children, especially if they're, a single parent or just, in general. Are there any support groups or something that could help biological parents so that way the children can stay in that home and work together as a family? Because I feel like, just growing up and not knowing how to deal with certain emotions and everything, we need some support just in general.
Commissioner, maybe, or
between the two of us, we can
yeah, okay.
Okay, I guess what I would say is, just as it was so eloquently said that you felt that you wanted role models among foster care alum, people who've been through the system, I think of an effective group with a lot of parents, working with a lot of parents, is a group called Parents Helping Parents. And it really is a group that focuses on families who've been involved with the child welfare system, many of whom have been court involved, and the leadership of that group is really alumni. They're parents who have really been able to work through many of their issues, and are peer supports for parents who are going through the process. There are different specialized, obviously, support groups, but I think that this group, for a lot of parents who are going through the court process or with protective services, to know that somebody's been there and to really have them talk to you about their experience is very helpful. And I know there are different organizations throughout the state, local Parents Helping Parents group. I'll be glad to provide some information if anybody's interested in that. It's never too late, and I think that a lot of parents really find that a very supportive, welcoming kind of group for them.
Yeah, and just to also respond to your question, the Department of Children and Families and Department of Mental Health, we've been working on creating, taking our two out-of-home systems, our residential systems, and putting them together into one system. And a part of what we're building as we're doing that is we're going to create what we're calling family support organizations. So family support organizations will be run by parents who've gone through the system, who've either had a child in foster care or have had an open protective service case or an open Department of Mental Health case, and be able to be there and offer local support groups across the Commonwealth. And also, when a new family comes in, they'll be able to partner with them, so they'll get a family that can support them through. A lot of the research is showing the more we have natural supports, parents, sort of parents helping parents, the better outcomes we can get.
Thank you.
Yeah. And your turn.
Just one other organization, particularly for parents who are involved with a lot of behavioral health issues with their children, is PAL. It's actually PPAL. And this is a group that really has a very strong network around the Commonwealth to support and work and help parents who are navigating through the mental health, behavioral health system. And again, I'd be happy to provide any information if anybody would want that.
Thank you. Judge Blissman?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much to the panelists. It's been a really, really provocative presentation. I'm a juvenile court judge. Before I was a juvenile court judge, I was a child advocate for 20 years, working with a lot of children in the child welfare and juvenile justice system. So, Sisto, to pick up on something that you had said, that is the importance of investing now, because in court, what I see and what Judge Garinger formerly saw is what happens if we don't. And listening to the eloquent presentations of people who have been the victims, to a degree, of our foster care system, it's tragically ironic that we intervene. These cases are called state intervention cases in the name of providing care, and often do harm. So I think we've got to reframe and recast this whole discussion in the context of public health. The medical model, looking at the issue as a continuum. And there's some certainly things we could do in the child welfare system to improve educational outcomes. I've been educated tonight about the importance, for example, as a judge at the point of entry, of demanding from the department, of knowing that school continuity is not going to be adversely affected. That's a significant tell, not only in school success, but it's also a significant factor in an issue that I want to talk about briefly, and that's the school-to-prison pipeline. Because the statistics that were cited about jobs and income are very, very interesting. Tragically, 50% of the children who don't graduate Massachusetts high schools, and this is a national reality, are apt to be arrested by the age of 33. This is nationally true, and it's true in Massachusetts. And I fear increasingly that a lot of us, I look around the room and I see a lot of court professionals, that a lot of us are sort of maybe unintentionally complicit. We're all sort of working on this school-to-prison pipeline. And, Commissioner, you make some very, very cogent observations. It's one thing to talk about pockets of excellence in terms of individual initiatives. We've got to look at the reality of how we fund public education. How we fund public education is a critical, maybe the critical juvenile justice issue that we face in terms of the dropout rate, in terms of the cost that we then assume as taxpayers in supporting, tragically, people who have been institutionalized. So it's great to have this type of discussion. Months ago, a lot of us were here talking about issues of racial disproportionality in the child welfare system. It's wonderful to have educators in the room. We need juvenile justice people. We need child welfare people. We need educators, because we're talking about the same communities. We do need a global perspective, because the issues are really, really crucial. To give this some specific context, recently statistics were published showing the decline in arrest rates. Very heartening in terms of the juvenile arrest rates across the state, and these reflect national figures. Interestingly, however, at the same time, numbers have been published about the alarming increase in school suspension. So as we talk about, Susan, creating a nurturing and supportive environment, I think we've got to rethink some basic concepts, such as the need for accountability, expecting more from our children, but also being more supportive. I think this really involves adopting a more strength-based philosophy to the children we have in our schools, especially looking at the disproportionate number of children of color who are being excluded from school, and those children who then end up in our juvenile justice system. So you can have accountability and be strength-based, and I think we have to really rethink how we view the construct of zero tolerance. So zero tolerance is a meaningful concept if you talk about responding to an incident, but if you don't respond proportionately, then you're being intolerant. And it's cruelly ironic that in an era of decreasing arrests, we have more children leaving school, which is tragic. And that's what we see every day in the court system. So I welcome the discussion, but I think that's an important piece. You know, the American Bar Association, the American Psychological Association have all, this is not new. And I think we've got to be more developmentally sensitive for all children. But I also think in terms of education reform, we can't be naive about the systemic structural issues, which include how we fund public education and basic issues such as racial resegregation and housing resegregation. So I think all these issues have to be on the agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Bilster. Thank you.
My name is Robert, and this is Joe. She's my coworker. We come from a bookstore in Waltham on Moody Street. More Than Words. It's a youth-run organization.
Hey there. More Than Words.
And I had a question about schooling. So say if you're a kid and you get taken out of school and put into an alternative school, and you're doing good, how long would it be able to take you to get back into a public school setting, such as a high school or whatever grade you got taken out to and moving up to next?
The question, tell me if I heard it correctly, that your question is if you're in an alternative school, how long does it take to get back into a regular public school?
Yes.
I guess to me, it will depend on why you're in the alternative school and what came before that. Some local districts create alternative school programs and for different purposes. Alternative schools are often places in which students who have been excluded may attend school, particularly if they have received special education services, and it provides a stable educational environment for those students who would otherwise be excluded but can't be for legal reasons. And so they continue to receive their education there. Sometimes schools just create alternative schools for other reasons, such as students who would benefit from an alternative environment. If it's the former, if it's an alternative school that a student has to attend or else be excluded totally, then it would be determined by the amount of time of the exclusion. So we'd have to know that. If there was a finite time that the student is required to attend an alternative school, then after that, presumably you'd have the right to go back into your public school setting. I see Susan reacting over there. And
no, I'm feeling like Diane's saying it's hard to answer your question without knowing more. And we have an education law clinic right here at school, and if we'll give you that phone number, and you can talk to a lawyer about it. But I think the point that's being raised is that in our state, you can actually be expelled from school and not allowed to go back. It's mind-boggling, it's painful, and to think we do this to someone in foster care is overwhelming. But we'd be happy to give you our card so we can talk more about the details, if you'd like.
there's legislation pending yet again to assure that students cannot be permanently excluded with no services, as may be the case now in Massachusetts, regardless of age.
We'd like to know if it's all right if we can explain to the milieu here about More Than Words.
Sure. Tell us about More Than Words, and then we can take 2 questions, okay? Thanks.
All right, so we're a youth-run business, and so we have...
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Yeah. We're a youth-run business, so we have people from the ages of 16 to 21 who work here, and our motto is taking charge of a business will have you take charge of your life. So I think if you guys are asking for advice on how to, get youth more successful, is to let them know that you guys are trying to do this, and it's so it's so cool to have so many people here, and if they all knew that there were people who actually thought about them as much as you guys do, then I think they would look at this so much more differently. It's so cool and inspiring to see that you guys really want to make a change, and I think that you should ask them about their opinions on it. So,
if I could just put in a little plug, one of my favorite bookstores is More Than Words, and it's on Moody Street in Waltham, and I just would encourage everybody to frequent the bookstore. If you have books to donate, they do a wonderful job of taking your books. Take a look around, see these youth there. They are fantastic, and the skills they're learning in terms of turning their lives around through jobs and connections and success, I just can't say enough. It's a great program.
And I would like to say, if you guys are going to donate books, if you can donate boxes too, because we run out a lot of those.
Yeah, if you guys have books, give it to More Than Words, yeah.
And boxes.
And boxes. And
Okay.
boxes. Okay, let's.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We take a couple more questions, and then we'll save those last five. We can save 5 questions if you send it to us, so we can, in further communication, send them back out to you guys, the answers from our panelists. So, so don't worry, we'll answer every question at some point.
If you're restricting it to questions, I won't say anything. I'll just turn the mic over.
If you have, go,
Well, all right,
you're there.
First of all, thank you, panelists, for what you've said. I wasn't going to say anything until, is it Lisa spoke? This had a powerful impact on me. And, you know, the idea of what people go through who experience the system, how they feel. And so just building on your comments, Susan, your comments about what happens to a kid in care in school had a powerful impact. I had 12 informal foster placements. My sister had 1, and she was the #1 student in our school. She had total stability. I had total instability. I wasn't even allowed in class, and it was horrific. I was kept back a year. That's just one broad comment. I went from that to an orphanage that had morphed into a kind of residential school where I spent 7 years in about 7 group homes. So I have the bizarre experience of having seen all aspects of the system, you name it, and some comparators. If I talked as much as I wanted to, Daniel would really throw me out of here, so I won't. But I will say that I'm 50, and I look back on this, and as we get older, we realize what happened to us, and we come out of our closets, and we try to put the pieces back together again. So some thoughts. 1, whenever I see people obsess over the education outcomes, it troubles me because we forget the social outcomes. So I would like to see data on alcohol, substance abuse, divorce, you name it. This stuff is terrifying to me because I'm at an age where my friends that I grew up with, my roommate in one of my group homes committed suicide a year ago. Another of my group home mates just drank himself to death. And why are we seeing so much of this when I see people focus on just the educational data and 3 out of 100 foster kids go to a community college? I think, show me the data on how people are constructing their families later. Let's have that data drive a more nuanced examination of the system, and let's fix this part of the system. When Susan talks about the care for these kids and providing them with security, understanding when they're staring out a window that they really aren't learning disabled, as I was viewed, that they really may just have problems in their current placement, or in my case, it was often I was left alone. So data about social outcomes. Secondly, fixing the schools and waiting for Superman is a wonderful idea. It is not necessarily the same. In fact, it is different than fixing foster care. Thirdly, there are so many different foster experiences. I know people who bonded with their foster families, and it was great. They are what I call the outliers, and one of them is here today who, what's your name again? I'm sorry, I forgot. Come on, you invited me to speak last year. Kim is an outlier, a tremendous foster care success story. I'm probably an outlier. Sue behind me probably is. But the point is, there are some good placements. I ended up at this residential school. Why is that right? Let's look at what's working right in foster care. And then picking up on Sexto's comments, these kids have voices, and let's talk with them and see what's going on in their lives. Okay, I'll stop now. Thank you for having indulged me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to take one more question, but before I would like everybody to say thank you to Diane, who's going to have to make a run. So thank you, Diane. Thank you. Yeah. And to play off your comment, Sixto would like to say some words.
I understand your concerns with all the social part of it. In fact, I understand a lot. I was one of those kids. I've been in the system for, since 11 months. So I've been in the system my whole entire life, and I definitely was one of those kids who were unstable, definitely was one of those kids who education lagged behind in my elementary years. But I think that one thing that made me different from my brothers, 3 of them which are in jail, 1 of them who have died because they got caught up in the wrong things, is that I understood at an early age that the only way out for me was education. Once I realized that, my life completely changed. I stopped being like everybody else. I stopped doing everything everyone else was doing. And no matter how unstable my situation was, I always demanded that my education was number 1. I moved 3 times, placement 3 times while I was in high school. And I did not let DCF whatsoever, Department of Children and Family, move my school. I told them I would rather sleep outside my school before I move schools. And that's the type of advocacy and that's the type of things that we need to teach our kids to do, because once we have our education, once we understand the importance on how far our education is going to fix our life, then everything else will fall into place eventually. Everything comes in a season, I believe, and yes, right now, I always used to tell myself, right now I may be unstable. Right now I don't have a home. But one thing I do have is my education, and one thing I will always have is my education.
See why we brought him in from Connecticut. Okay, one more question.
How you guys doing? I'm actually not going to ask a question personally. I just want to make a statement and actually just tell you about the organization and hopefully start collaborations. So I guess my first statement, I agree with everything that's been said here so far. Having been a foster youth, I've been adopted at 15. Been stabbed, I'm from New York, so it was definitely rougher growing up in Harlem. I had it way rougher than many other kids. So with that said, there's a couple things, I a recent graduate of Northeastern University, and I started my own nonprofit dedicated to helping children in foster care before I leave for law school, which I deferred. But this issue, I'm sorry for getting a little emo over here, but this issue is very close to me, and we keep talking. I had the opportunity to be in service at the White House, and Vice President Joe Biden said to me, "You never question a man's approach. You never question what's in a man's head. You question their approach." And with that said, we keep talking about the best approaches, and everybody in this room has a great heart. But some of the programs that even you, Commissioner, of DCF, Mr. Angelo, had talked about, giving money to kids or something like that. Some of those programs don't work, and we're sitting here talking about the programs themselves and saying maybe this has a rate of success or something like that. But in reality, some of those programs don't work. So to sit here and say something like that, angers me to some extent. Another thing I will say too. Is the importance of a role model and a mentor. In my life, it was definitely key and essential to have somebody like a role model. Judge Ireland is one of my role models. Judge Harris is one of my role models. And some of those folks who stepped up to the plate and actually showed me the ropes. So I think that's definitely essential. And going back to the gentleman's comment prior to me or before me, he talked about education. You can't get a great education if you're worried about security, if you don't have a home of your own. I know, Cito talked about, having that education and, looking at that. Some of us don't have that. Me and you both have that, and saying education is our number 1 priority. And if we have this, nobody else can take this away from us, and prioritizing that. But some of us don't. So the nonprofit that I started is called Foster Skills, and we recently started it last year. The model is actually to use youth advocacy centers model, getting beyond the system, and also incorporating Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be most basic. To start off with giving kids the basic skills and rudimentary skills, security coping skills, resiliency skills, thereby building the child and typifying that pyramid So it's health management skills, money management skills, and we're going to launch a portal, which actually some of our Northeastern kids created to help kids in foster care have resources to, a plethora of different opportunities, things. And the second thing we do is we connect kids to organizations. I haven't bridged a connection with DCF because having had the conversation with folks, they wanted to dish off kids with mental health issues, and I don't have the capacity to do that. I'm just a idealistic person who just works hard and wants to help. So with that said, I think everybody in this room really wants to help. And in doing so, we should all sit down and have a conversation, grab everybody's contact information, and let's help and look at the best solutions, going back to that, the best solutions, and not necessarily Band-Aids, but the best solutions, figuring out this does not work, this does work, and then moving from there. So with that said, I appreciate the panel talking to us today. Daniel, thank you for inviting me. And this was a great opportunity to hear the disparities and some great voices, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. And we got a couple more things, but if you guys have anything you want to say before I let you go?
No, they should take them. Let them go.
Oh, pardon?
We want to proceed to the...
Yeah, okay.
Could I ask a question?
One more. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. What are the main reasons why there's so much movement, so many placement changes? Is it the availability and turnover of foster parents? Is it something else? What are the main kind of 2 or 3 reasons?
The $26 million question. We're really trying to understand that. Part of it I just kind of alluded to. We are understanding that kids do better if you can place them with kin, with relatives. One of the issues is sort of the availability of a sufficient number of foster families. Some of it is sort of how the front end of systems are designed. In some states, and Massachusetts is not among these states, you have a front end system that allows children to come in as their first placement and stay in that first placement long enough to where either they can go back home and be reunited, or they can get sort of better matched to a family that can meet their longer term needs. That's one of the things we want to do over the next year here in Massachusetts. So some of it is sort of systemic, for instance, in some states, for instance, you take Massachusetts, for instance, we were, I'm going back many, many years, we had sort of maybe 8,000 children in foster care, say in 1992, 1994, and all of a sudden we exploded to where we had 13,000 children come 1997, 99. So we made some decisions to sort of quickly put some things in place, and those decisions that we made, 12, 13, 14 years are kind of impacting us now in terms of those were good sort of Band-Aids, but they weren't good long-term solutions, and I have to go back in results. But some of it is, making sure you match, that when you place a child in a home, that there's a match between that child's needs and what that home can provide. Some of it is being able to figure out supports, and being proactive with some of those supports, because, it's, as Judge Geringer said, raising a kid's a very tough job. Sometimes we wait until problems start, and then we start saying, okay, here's some help and some support, and let's be more proactive with that. So those are some of the things. And then one other thing is sometimes we feel like either the child has to either be in the system or at home with their parents, and we begin to say, we need to better integrate, because maybe the kid can't live with the birth parent, but there's a lot maybe the birth parent can bring in terms of supporting the child, supporting the placement. And we're beginning to try things out, like day one when the child's placed in foster care, having the birth parent, be there when the placement's made. Day one, having the birth parent call for instance, one birth parent was telling me a story of their child didn't like chicken. You could give this child any other meat, but chicken was not the thing. Well, in that foster home, they ate a lot of chicken. And so this child was having a struggle because he wasn't eating much, and they thought, well, what's wrong with him? Is he got some emotional issues? And then when they kind of crosswalked it back to the parents, said he'll eat anything but chicken. And so acknowledging that there's a vital role that the birth family can play in supporting those foster placements. So it's a lot of things, and we're trying to sort through and figure those out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're going to have to cut the questions down. I'm very, very sorry. But please save them and give them to us, and then also come down and talk to we have a reception coming up here in a moment, so, come down and talk to all these wonderful panelists. So I want to just thank the panel. If everybody else could give them applause. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful to meet you. I love what you had to say.
And now, before we're done, we still have a wonderful guest, Victoria Rowell, who is a best-selling author, a visionary advocate, and an acclaimed actress. Victoria, if we could have you come up here and say a couple words to close us out, basically.
Good evening. I'll keep my comments to a minimum. I first of all want to say how extraordinary it is. A former farmer from Maine, raised as a foster youth in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and studied classical ballet under the auspices of the Ford Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, and spent 18 years in foster care, several sets of foster parents throughout, but all had to do with passing the baton around classical ballet. The arts, I believe, are so essential in our public schools, and we're stripping the schools of music, art, how other children communicate and learn, mathematics, how they learn assemblage with other people, community and ensemble work. And so I was very, very fortunate to have a foster parent in Maine, a black farmer, who felt that it would be imperative that I study classical ballet, and so she found this scholarship, and so I was very, very blessed to be able to move to Boston, and through her network of friends was able to live with different people, and I had extraordinary social workers. So a lot has been said. I'm not going to talk about statistics. I'll just simply speak to a personal experience. I had two incredible social workers that allowed me to cross state lines. They could have lost their jobs, but in this room we have the ability to not only be statisticians, to not only be extraordinary at what we do. We saw the illustrious panel and their shared information and their expertise, but we have to find the wiggle room between the rules. And I had social workers that found the wiggle room between the rules, and foster parents. My ballet teacher, God bless her, is 84 years old, lives in Dublin, New Hampshire. It's where I was married. She's one of my mothers, and mentors are essential. Mentors are essential. And this woman taught me on Massachusetts Avenue when I was 9 years old. 9 years old. She said, no matter what the chaos is, you will have this ballet bar. And between the network of a ballet teacher, Esther Brooks, who ended up giving out 250 scholarships that year, Agatha Armstead, who taught me the 6 rudimentary steps of classical ballet from a book in Maine on a farm, and my social workers and our network of friends and teachers, the nuns at St. Patrick's in Roxbury, where I went to school. And that was possible because of a scholarship. My whole life came together here in Massachusetts, in Dorchester and Roxbury during the extraordinary agony of busing in Boston. I saw black and white people pull together, raising other people's children. You couldn't see your face in theirs, but they didn't give a damn. They cared about raising children and giving them access, giving them opportunity, a gateway to a future. And so, when I come to Boston here, I was at Wheelock College last week. We had the Wheel Awards, 25 years of art there, and it's a work of College of Social Work. And now to be in this illustrious space, Harvard University, my God, I used to walk across, come out of Harvard Square and run down Brattle Street, or sometimes I ran around the cemetery here to 11 Garden Street, where our school was, in the basement of that church. And it gives me such joy to be invited, Daniel, to participate in this particular program, because, as was mentioned earlier, you're speaking to education and children. And that is rare. When we get to talk about mentors, justices, social workers, education, fine arts, because after a humanity, or after a culture is gone, what is left but its humanity? So we must continue to raise the bar for children, as was mentioned also. Let's not say, oh, poor Johnny grew up in foster care. I had people that said, by God, we want to see you do a triple pirouette, and by the way, read about art history on Louis XIV at Versailles. I mean, it was never low for me. And that was something that never occurred to me, to reach lower, because I could get away with it because I was one of 6 children, all of different paternity. Or that I should reach lower because our mother was institutionalized. Or that we should reach lower because our social worker said college was never going to be an option. And it wasn't. My alma mater is American Ballet Theater. So, you know, we have to continue to embrace everything that was said in here, because no one thing was more important than the other. But that we must continue to take each child and hold their hands and not let go, because that is what it takes. We can sit up here and we can talk about our experiences and talk about our expertise, and all that's important. One is not diminishing that. And certainly I would never do that. I've been a national spokesperson for the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Casey Family Services, for the past 13 years. And other groups work together with us. And we must have the expertise of legal in the discussion. But the bottom line is my 84-year-old ballet teacher who kept me at that bar for 8 years fully scholarshiped. And she saw something without infringing upon my privacy. And I speak to my foster alum and those in foster care, and thank you for the acknowledgement of asking us all to stand. That's very rare. She knew something was going on, but she didn't ask me to tell my story like it was some kind of movie to be played out. Well, why are you in foster care, dear? We don't want to always tell our story, and that's not necessarily what you want to hear anyway. But what she did know was that I came to ballet with tattered ballet clothes, and she said, I'm going to provide your transportation money. I heard transportation. I'm going to provide meals for you during the summer program, as we sat over on the Charles River. And she knew instinctively, we're human, we feel, we know something's wrong. And I say to you, and I dare say that on this campus, there are foster youth. There are youth who are being raised in kinship care situations, perhaps by grandparents, due to crack cocaine and methamphetamine addiction by their parents, that are giving their last dime so that their child can have what they need to be on this campus to be socially competitive. I can guarantee you those children are here. And so that is why for the past 21 years I've dedicated my life to the Rowell Foster Children's Positive Plan, which the Annie E. Casey Foundation supports. And what we do collectively is we provide fine art scholarships in classical piano and dance and painting and art and seeing the world if it requires them to go abroad. But more importantly than that, we show scientifically the measurements that if you give children art, it affects them academically. And so we work with Howard University and Spelman College and San Francisco State and other colleges where we provide socially competitive dollars. And what that is that I've had the four-year ride in the fine arts circle. I know what it feels like to be at the Metropolitan Opera House and to dance with American Ballet Theater family. But did anyone ever ask me, where on God's earth are you sleeping at night? Did NYPD come and visit you last night because they called you a vagrant? But by day, you're in a tutu, standing on 10 toes, fighting for your life. And so I ask you, go to the administrator's office. Ask, is there a child that we can anonymously help that needs money for books? They have the four-year ride, but they can't stay. They drop out because they feel inept. They feel inefficient socially. And so we must ask about these, as the gentleman pointed out, we have to ask about what we're doing socially for these children so that they can participate in campus life here at Harvard or at Spelman or at Wheelock or at Northeastern. We have to be responsible not only for the scores. Time is up. I sat there for 2.5 hours, so I'm going to finish what I have to say, darling. So we have to also be responsible for the whole person, as was said on the panel. And let us be the power of one. Let us, when the burden gets hard and heavy, ask for broader shoulders. Let us not self-edit and fear walking into the administrative offices and saying, you know what, I have $10 and I want to help somebody. I have something to offer to a child that might be right next to my child in class. Something we don't think about in college. Holidays, breaks. Many students become homeless when the campuses shut down. They simply become homeless, and rather than endure the embarrassment, they leave campus forever. Well, what happened to Mary? What happened to Jen? You never know, because they're trying to protect the integrity of who they are and their privacy. So I encourage you, we all have something to offer. A chair at the Thanksgiving table. We have an opportunity to participate individually with the administration. Everyone has something to offer. And I share with you the ballet story simply because that was my lifeline. And you must never underestimate what you have to offer. It could save a child's life. And finally, we had Viacom up there. But I worked for Viacom for 8 years. And I took a chance and I asked the producers, I said, would you consider hiring foster youth as production assistants for your shows? And at first there was a lot of quizzical looks, and I had a third eye, and what's foster care? But eventually, when we pulled in all the partners, they said, you know, this isn't a bad idea. You say 25 to 30 foster youth emancipate every year. They went ahead and hired foster youth as production assistants at $500 a week. So get busy. Thank you.
Anyway, I promise to be very brief. I just want to very, very quickly thank all of you for coming today, the experts in the room for taking the time to join us, those of you who came to educate yourselves about the issues, and perhaps most importantly, the youth who came here to educate the rest of us. I want to especially thank, yes, thank you. Margot Strucker, if you could just start making your way up here, please, as I'm talking, to make this fast. We're very lucky to have Margot Strucker, who's the Child Advocacy Program Assistant here at Harvard Law School. No one did more than Margot to ensure tonight's program was a success. We're tremendously lucky to have her as part of our Harvard Law School Child Advocacy Program team. Thank you, Margot. And Daniel. Again, I promise this will be brief, but Daniel Hempel, who you guys are very familiar with at this point in the evening, provided the vision behind this event. I have no idea where he gets all his energy from. Since he's always on the go, traveling across the country, spreading his message on children in the foster care system, Cap thought he'd appreciate a couple things, including a Harvard coffee mug, which is in here. You can come up and check it out, Daniel, if you want. And throughout his travels, Daniel continues to write, mainly on the computer, but nonetheless, we thought we would give him an old-fashioned Harvard pen.
There we go.
I also want to thank a few of the other important partners, the Stewart Foundation, Participant Media, the Einhorn Family Charitable Trust, the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute, and thank you guys very much earlier today for running around across campus and helping us pull off last-minute details. We really appreciate it. And my last thank you, before I turn it over to Daniel, unless he has any final comments, is finally, we are completely indebted to the Harvard Law School staff, without whom we could have never hosted an event like this. Our remarkable facilities, and you can hold your applause to the end, but our remarkable facilities office, custodial staff, media services, Rob and Paul, who are around here in the back, our events office, CJ, who's actually a foster care advocate in the corner here, as well as being an events officer here at Harvard Law School, our ITS department, and last but not least, and perhaps most importantly at this time of night, is our catering. So unless, Daniel, did you have anything else you wanted to say? Briefly. So after Daniel, please go down and enjoy a really lovely, we have tons of food, drinks, so thank you guys for lasting till the end, and enjoy after Daniel gives one last remark.
Yeah, it's only momentary. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. It's only momentary. Thank you to everybody, and it's only momentary, but I didn't want to take it to miss the chance to have this room full of advocates and thinkers and everything else, not to take advantage of what we have in the bags and what you guys can do out of here. So in your bags, you have a $15 donor choose card. Please use that to donate to the charity of your choice. Also, you were given a copy of the film Waiting for Superman. Please watch the film with your family, friends, and neighbors, and discuss that film with your community and pass it on. And keep the conversation going, and also join the National Waiting for Superman Social Action Campaign at waitingforsuperman.com. Also, adoption and foster care mentoring are here. We've talked about mentors. They're downstairs. They can sign you up. Colby can sign you up and get you to mentor if you've got the time to do that and the care to do that. We also have Chris from Foster Focus Magazine, who should be downstairs somewhere distributing magazines so she can get you on the pulse of what's going on in terms of foster care issues. And if you guys want to continue to nudge our political leaders, then just follow our prompts from here on out, because, you know, we're not done yet, and we're on the road to educational equality. Thank you, guys. Thank you.